In the heart of Clarksdale, Mississippi, where the Delta's soulful hum mingled with the scent of magnolias and the weight of hard-won resilience, 16-year-old Tamika Jackson lived in a world that felt both too small and too heavy. Her home was a sagging shotgun house on Cherry Street, its faded green paint peeling like memories left too long in the sun. The porch creaked under every step, and the roof leaked when the rains came, which was often enough to keep a bucket in the corner of the living room. Tamika shared the house with her grandmother, Miss Clara, a woman whose hands were as tough as the cotton fields she'd worked in her youth and as gentle as the hymns she sang while sewing late into the night. Miss Clara's pension was a thin thread, barely enough to keep the lights on, and Tamika filled the gaps with after-school jobs, cleaning houses for the wealthier folks across town, braiding hair for neighbors, or running errands for anyone with $1 to spare. She was a girl who carried dreams in her quiet brown eyes but buried them under the weight of survival, her smile a shield against a world that rarely smiled back. It was a chilly November evening in 2025, the kind where the air bit at your knuckles and the sky bruised purple as the sun sank low. Tamika was out front, sweeping the porch with a broom worn down to stubs, when she noticed two figures trudging down the dusty road. A man, tall and lean, his coat too thin for the cold, walked with a slight limp, like each step cost him something. Beside him was a little girl, no older than 7, her pigtails tied with mismatched ribbons, her jacket patched at the elbows. They carried nothing but a small backpack, its straps frayed, and their shoes were caked with the red clay of Mississippi's backroads. They looked like they'd been walking for days, their faces etched with exhaustion, their eyes searching for something, a motel, a meal, maybe just a moment of mercy. Tamika's first instinct was to keep sweeping, to stay out of trouble. Strangers didn't often come through this part of town, where the streetlights flickered and the houses leaned into each other like old friends sharing secrets. When strangers did pass through, they weren't always kind, and Tamika had learned early to keep her guard up. But something about the little girl's eyes, wide, trusting, and edged with fear, caught her like a hook in her heart. The girl was shivering, her lips faintly blue, and the man's shoulders slumped like he was carrying more than just that backpack. Tamika set the broom against the wall, her hands trembling not from the cold but from a feeling she couldn't name. "Y'all all right?" she called out, her voice cutting through the evening's quiet. The man stopped, startled, like he wasn't used to being seen. He looked at Tamika, then down at the girl, and back again, his eyes wary but soft. "We're just passing through," he said, his voice low, almost ashamed. "Got caught out here longer than we planned. Trying to find a place to stay for the night." Tamika glanced at the girl, whose small hand clung to the man's like it was her only anchor. The nearest motel was a good 10 miles away, and the last bus to anywhere had rattled through town an hour ago. The road was no place for a child in this cold, and Tamika could almost hear Miss Clara's voice in her head, "Child, your heart's bigger than your sense sometimes." She knew they couldn't afford to feed extra mouths, let alone offer a bed, but turning them away felt like turning her back on something sacred. "Come on in," she said, holding open the screen door, its hinges groaning. "It ain't much, but it's warm." The man hesitated, his jaw tightening like he was weighing the cost of trust. "We don't want to be a burden," he said, his voice rough but polite. "We'll move on if it's trouble." "You ain't," Tamika replied, her tone firm but kind, the way she'd learned from Miss Clara. "Just don't track that mud inside. My grandma'll have my hide." Inside, the house smelled of cornbread fresh from the oven and the faint lavender of Miss Clara's favorite soap, a luxury she'd never give up. The living room was small, cluttered with a mismatched couch, an old recliner, and a coffee table scarred from years of use. Framed photos lined the walls, Tamika's parents, gone too soon in a car accident when she was 5, her great-uncle in his army uniform, Miss Clara's wedding day, her dress glowing white against the sepia of time. Miss Clara was in the kitchen, humming Amazing Grace as she stirred a pot of collards, when Tamika ushered the strangers in. She raised an eyebrow, her sharp gaze taking in the man's worn coat and the girl's trembling frame, but she didn't protest. "Y'all hungry?" she asked, already pulling extra plates from the cupboard, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd fed more than her share of strays. The man introduced himself as James, and the little girl, who barely spoke, was Lily. They sat at the kitchen table, a wobbly wooden thing Tamika had helped sand down when she was 10. Over bowls of collards, cornbread, and a few slices of ham Miss Clara had stretched from last week's grocery run, James shared fragments of their story. He was a widower, he said, his voice catching on the word like it still hurt to say. His wife had passed 2 years ago from cancer, leaving him and Lily unmoored. He'd lost his job, then their home, and they'd been drifting ever since, chasing rumors of work in Jackson. Their car had broken down 50 miles back, and their money had run out somewhere between a gas station and a diner that wouldn't take IOUs. Tamika listened, her fork still, her heart aching for Lily, who ate in tiny bites, her eyes fixed on her plate like she was afraid it might vanish. Every now and then, Lily glanced at Tamika, and the ghost of a smile flickered, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Miss Clara, ever the keeper of stories, asked gentle questions, drawing out a little more. James admitted he wasn't good at asking for help, that he'd been raised to keep his head down and work through the pain. But the road had worn him thin, and Lily deserved better than cold nights and empty promises. Tamika watched him, noticing the way his hands shook slightly as he spoke, the way he looked at Lily like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. She thought of her own parents, of the hole they'd left, and how Miss Clara had stitched her life back together with love and stubbornness. Maybe that's why she couldn't look away from these two, because she knew what it felt like to need someone to care. That night, Tamika gave up her bed for Lily, who curled up under a quilt Miss Clara had sewn from scraps of old dresses. The quilt was a patchwork of colors, blues, reds, and yellows, each piece a story of survival. James insisted on the couch, though it was too short for his frame, and Tamika made a pallet on the living room floor, the hardwood cool against her back. She lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling where a water stain spread like a map of nowhere. She wondered why she'd let them in, why she felt so connected to strangers who'd be gone by morning. Maybe it was Lily's hug before bed, her small arms fierce and grateful, or the way James's voice had cracked when he said, "Y'all don't know what this means." It was the kind of thanks that carried weight, like he hadn't felt kindness in so long he'd forgotten its shape. Before dawn, Tamika woke to the sound of the screen door creaking. She sat up, heart pounding, and found the couch empty, the quilt folded neatly. James and Lily were gone, leaving only a note on the kitchen table, written on a scrap of paper in careful handwriting. "Thank you for giving us a place to rest. You'll never know what it meant. James." Tamika held the note, her chest tight with a mix of disappointment and relief. She'd wanted to say goodbye, to see Lily's smile one more time, but maybe that was the way of things. Some people pass through your life like shadows, leaving only echoes. Life slipped back into its rhythm. Tamika went to school, where she excelled in English but struggled with math, her mind always half on the bills piling up at home. She braided hair on weekends, her fingers quick and sure, and helped Miss Clara with the mending that kept their little world afloat. But the memory of that night stayed with her, tucked away like the note she kept in her dresser drawer. She wondered where James and Lily were, if they'd found a place to call home, if they remembered the girl who'd opened her door. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived, its envelope crisp and official, addressed to Tamika and Miss Clara Jackson. It was from a lawyer in Jackson, and inside was a check for $100,000, along with a note in James's handwriting, "I wasn't honest with you. I didn't lose everything, just thought I had. You reminded me what matters. This is a start to repay you. Keep being the light you are." Tamika's hands shook as she read it, the numbers on the check blurring through tears. Miss Clara, who rarely cried, pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, and for once, she had no advice, no scripture to quote, just awe. The story spread like wildfire through Clarksdale. Neighbors whispered over fences, and the local paper ran a feature, piecing together what Tamika hadn't known. James wasn't just a drifter. He was James Ellison, a tech entrepreneur who'd built a fortune in software before his wife's death sent him spiraling. Grief had stripped him of purpose, and he'd taken Lily on the road, searching for something to fill the void. That night in Tamika's home, with its warm food and worn quilt, had been a turning point, a reminder that kindness could anchor even the most lost soul. The money was nothing to him, a fraction of his wealth, but to Tamika and Miss Clara, it was everything. It meant a new roof, paid off medical bills, and a college fund for Tamika, who dreamed of studying literature, of writing stories that made people feel seen. But the real gift wasn't the money. It was the way Tamika's heart grew, knowing she'd changed 2 lives without expecting a thing in return. She kept James's note in her Bible, next to Psalm 23, a reminder that even in a world that felt heavy, a single act of kindness could ripple out, touching lives in ways she'd never see. Somewhere, out in the world, Lily was growing up, carrying the memory of a night when a stranger opened her door and made her feel safe. And Tamika, sweeping the porch on another chilly evening, felt a little less alone, knowing she'd been a light in someone's darkness, just as they'd been in hers.